going to introduce you to the presenters. Our presenters are Shireen Payton. She is the Director of the Community Collaboration Division at Kenneth Young Center, and Nicole Barrett, who is the Deputy Director of the Community Collaboration Center Division at Kenneth Young Center. So Nicole and Shireen, it's all you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Just to start off as well, my pronouns are she, her, hers.
My pronouns are she, her, hers as well.
Right, thank you.
Oops.
All right, so I'm going to review some of our objectives for today. So first, to gain a general understanding of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Second, to learn inclusive practices for communication and youth engagement. You'll notice a little emoji with glasses on some of the slides. This is to kind of note to folks that this slide is more of a resource that can be reviewed at home. As noted prior in the opening plenary, this PowerPoint will be available online. So we may not review this slide in depth, but there are some key points that we will review. So just kind of a heads up for folks. So to get us started, this was one of the questions actually as well in the opening plenary of whether or not we'll be discussing or what does LGBTQ plus mean. So here we have LGBTQIA, some other terms on the right-hand side that folks may see, LGBT, GLBT, the gay community. On our team, we typically use LGBTQ plus. And so kind of what that plus means is it's adding making sure that we're being inclusive of the other identities within the LGBTQ plus community. So we have L, lesbian, G, gay, B, bisexual, T, transgender, Q, questioning and or queer, and then the I, intersex, A, asexual. There are a good amount of other identities within the LGBTQ plus community. So hence we do add that. Our team likes to do the plus again to be inclusive of folks.
I'd also like to add that the Fenway Institute is a great resource where they keep an updated list of all the different identities, expressions. And so if you go to the resource that's listed, that's the PDF that we use, but if you go to the Fenway Institute's web address, then you can find updated information.
So we wanted to highlight some outdated and or inappropriate terms. So transvestite, transsexual, transgendered, it's not a verb. You say transgender person. Derogatory phrases such as she-male, he, she, it, other phrases that are said by people not of the orientation or identity. It's really important here to refer to people as they like to be referred. So letting folks identify themselves and then being able to refer to them how they identify. So we'll kind of go throughout the PowerPoint again, talking about the different identities. So the first one we wanted to talk about is transgender. Also folks know as trans. So this is an umbrella term for folks whose gender identity does not or is different than that they were assigned at birth. So folks may hear the terms of I'm a trans man and I was AFAB. AFAB means assigned female at birth. AMAB, assigned male at birth. So if folks hear AMAB, AFAB, that's usually what that is referring to. Important, the one thing I wanted to note within this slide as well is kind of acknowledging within the transgender community and the youth that we've worked with, the prevalence of body dysphoria, and that, like body dysphoria is the stress and discomfort that a person may experience with their body because it does not align with who they really are. So really being able to acknowledge that, the prevalence of that within the community. So looking at the different types of transitioning. So what is transitioning? Transitioning is the process of a person becoming who they really are. So the gender that, other people might say the gender that they feel on the inside, but really the people that they really are, who they really are. So the three different types of transitioning that we're going to talk about today are social transition, medical transition, and legal transition. A social transition is a person coming out to their friends, family, the community, coming out in schools. asking folks to use their correct pronouns, changing of clothes, using a name that matches their gender identity. Medical transition is looking at more hormone therapy and medical treatment. And then lastly, a legal transition is looking at a legal name change and having gender marker changes on a birth certificate or IDs. What's really important to note here as well is the health disparities within the community and within our systems, causing those, due to inequities. So it really impacts a person's way of transitioning and what they have access to. What I'm specifically, example of what I'm specifically talking about with that is when we've been working with youth in different capacities, I've heard youth make comments about, I would really love to start my hormone therapy, but my mom or my dad, they don't have enough money to be able to afford that yet, or our insurance doesn't cover it. There are different, again, that's where those different inequities are coming into play. So it's really important to keep that in mind, that sometimes people don't have access to do all three types, which leads me to my next point. A person doesn't have to do all three types of transitioning. It's whatever the person values is what types of transition they will do. So a person can just do social transition and be okay with that, and that's okay. So what's really important to note here is not expecting someone to do all three or to do specific ones. One that we commonly hear is trans people's, cisgender. I will go into what cisgender means in a moment, but cisgender people asking, well, did you get the surgery? That's highly offensive and very much not okay. So just kind of being able to, it's really none of a person's business if they did that, to be quite honest with you. So yeah, just kind of keeping that in mind. These are the three different types of transitions. And again, I really want to say that not everybody needs to transition or needs to do all three of them.
The other thing I'd like to point out too is that there is no such thing as one surgery or one medical treatment. More often than not, it takes more than one. So that's a myth out there as well, to say the surgery or did you have it done. That's a myth that cisgender people impose onto transgender folks that is oppressive. Mm-hmm. I'd also want to make sure if you have any questions, we don't want to fly through all of this before we transition into talking about gender pronouns and the binary. I want to ask our moderator, do we have any questions in the chat box? We don't see the chat box, so.
I do not have any questions right now.
Does anyone have any questions so far? We'll pause for a minute to give you a second to throw out a question if you have any. How would they do that, Marianne?
If you have questions, the easiest way to do it is to type it into the chat box.
All right. Next, looking at gender pronouns. So at the beginning of this presentation, Shireen and I both stated our pronouns. She, her, hers, she, her, hers. So the binary is she, her, hers, and he, him, his. The non-binary or gender neutral pronouns may be they, them, theirs, in the singular. Having no pronouns, so folks just asking, can you please just call me by my name? Interchangeable pronouns, meaning that a person really likes she, her, and he, him. So being able to use those interchangeably for the same person. Other ones are Z, zero, zeros, EM, er, and and the ... stands for there are other ones as well.
Which is awesome.
Yes, absolutely.
So the question is very appropriate right now, and that is there a proper way to ask pronouns, or should it be asked?
Great question. Yes, absolutely. How we've done within our work is really kind of starting to turn this into the norm of, as we introduced ourselves in the beginning, I said my name is Nicole, she, her, hers are my pronouns, and Shireen did the same thing. That's a respectable way to do it, is kind of introducing yourself and saying your own pronouns and opening up that door for folks.
Another way would also be if you forgot to mention it and you're not sure of someone's pronouns, you can say, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention my pronouns are she, her, hers. And then you're not necessarily asking them, but it gives them permission to share their pronouns. So if it's a person who has pronouns that they are used to sharing in conversation, then they will go ahead and share that. But if it's not a conversation that they have with folks, then they'll just leave it right there, and then you know that you can just move forward. And then also listen for how the person refers to themselves, when they're talking about, in conversation in general. And in other ways, you can just avoid the pronouns until you hear them use it. Sometimes that's the safest way. And it's something that you just have to practice, but it's very doable. But like Nicole mentioned, I would say making it the norm, making it the practice to always say what your pronouns are, or giving it the space on name cards. In our office, we all put it in our signature line. We just make it a habit as part of our introduction, a natural part of our introduction. So that's the easiest way, I would say.
Can you explain what Z, I don't know how to pronounce all these, but the AMR mean?
Again, it's just a neutral pronoun. It indicates that the person does not identify on the binary of male, female, but it's just a neutral term. So it's Z, A, M, R, who, per. So I was talking to John, and Per said that, and then you would complete the sentence.
I think something important to note when looking at pronouns is that acknowledging if this is something new for you, the odds are, and when working with clients, students, whatever capacity you work with LGBTQ plus youth, if it's new to you, you're probably going to get it wrong at some point. The important thing is, though, to not just say, oh my gosh, make a big deal of it. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Oh, how silly. I'm being dramatic here, but really I have seen some people do that. And then you turn the situation into them having to comfort you and telling you, it's okay. It's okay. It's really simple as just saying, I've done this before too. I messed it up and I say, oh, sorry, they. And then you move on with the conversation. So really, that's something I really like to touch on with folks, that when you mess up, if you mess up, acknowledge it, sorry, they, correct it, move on.
Right, good point. And then also if you're not sure, so if they say that their pronouns are Z, Zim, Zir, then you could say, can you give me an example? Or Google it. That'll help as well. We can all do our own homework too. That's very helpful. Oh, one more.
So this one is, are there materials out there that give an overview of gender pronoun descriptions to build awareness?
Yes, so you can go to the Fenway Institute is one place that I recommend. HRC.org is another reference. We'll also provide some, in addition to this PowerPoint, we'll provide some additional information as part of the follow-up.
I am noting that right now. We will make sure that we include some of those documents in there for you all. So here we have, this is kind of a good example that we wanted to do for pronouns. So yes.
Yes, so you're walking in a park, you see this cell phone on a bench. What would you say?
Someone left their phone.
Right?
So that's really an example of how, because one criticism that we've heard is people, but being confused about they, and but that just goes to show that there are examples, and there have been examples of how we have referred to a person in the they. Even
right.
Shireen, when you were talking earlier about if you don't know someone's pronouns, just ask them. So really, we've used it in our language.
Yeah, people get confused and they say, well, who's them? Who's the them that you're talking about? Because they feel like you can only use they and them in the plural. But here's an example of how we use they and them all the time, and we're referring to a singular. So we're not saying a group of people left their cell phone. We're saying someone left their phone, someone lost their bag, or someone left. We don't go through the he or she left their cell phone. We say, and even then we would say he or she left their you know? So again, it's an example, and it goes back hundreds of years in the language where we've used. And language is very fluid. You know, it's one of those things we would never say, did you bring the mails in from the mailbox? And yet nowadays we say, oh, I have so many, there's a lot of, did you send, how do we say this, like emails? We put an S on emails, which in the beginning I cringed because I'm like, how do you put an S on emails? On email, the word email, you don't put an S on, and yet we do it. Or text messages, you know, we put an S on text, which is, you know, but we learn, and language is evolving. So in the same way, you can use they, them, their to refer to an individual. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears and we'll talk a little bit about intersectionality. So this is a concept or a terminology, a term that was created by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a civil rights scholar. And intersectionality looks at basically like myself. I'm a bisexual African-American woman, and I am an atheist, and I'm approaching my mid-50s, which is why off screen I'm doing this. That's my fan going, and I'm putting my sweater on and off because I'm going through all the changes, the change. You know, middle class, mostly able-bodied, I would say. So all those different identities that I have, they come together and they have different meaning. They have different, they have different effects on the life that I have, the life of my children, the life of my wife, etc. So intersectionality just shows how the different constructs of race, ethnicity, culture, religion, age, orientation, expression, all of that, where it all comes together. And so there is a concept that if you work in social services, you may be familiar with what's called minority stress is one thing that people are familiar with. And that's where there's stresses that being African-American or being Latinx or being Asian that comes with being a person of color. So on top of that, what Kimberly Crenshaw looked at is that with LGBTQ individuals who are also people of color, there's an additional gender minority stress that happens. So if you're female and Black and LGBTQ, there's additional stress. If you're transgender and, you know, Latino or transgender and Filipino, etc. So what we know is that designing early interventions that address the negative health outcomes, such as bullying and harassment that happens out in our society, on the structural level, on the societal level, not just the individual level, those are things that can help our overall outcomes to be improved. Because what you will see is that there are greater health disparities in the LGBTQ population when you look at people of color. And as a result of it, I will say we do have higher rates of, you know, heart disease, higher rates of death, substance use, incarceration, school pushout, etc. And I would say that that is one of the reasons why a lot of the programs that we do here at our LGBTQ Center in particular, we're trying to figure out how we can connect with youth of color, how we can create opportunities for youth of color, even though we're located in the suburbs. I know I also live out in this area that while we do have great schools, it can be very challenging being a person of color and then being LGBTQ, navigating the systems out here, the schools, the employment, law enforcement, etc. But I would encourage you to look up on YouTube, Kimberly Crenshaw, and that's Kimberly with an E instead of a Y at the end. She has a great TED Talk, great YouTube videos that go into intersectionality. I would encourage you to look up that information. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about gender roles and expectations. And so this is, a lot of people look into gender work when they're looking at the LGBTQ plus community, and then also looking at intersectionality when you look at people of color and when you're looking at racial and ethnic minorities, because within these groups, there's certain gender roles and expectations that are dictated by various cultures, I will say. So I have a question for the audience. How is the binary male-female imposed in our culture? And when I say our culture, I mean Midwest, we could say, well, let's just go with Midwest United States. So if anyone wants to type it into the chat, and then Marianne, because we can't see the chat, if you want to read it for us, that would be great. So how is the binary imposed in our culture? In other words, this is what you will do because you are male or because you are female.
So I have all bathrooms and locker rooms, advertisements and media. Media and TV shows. For a long time, high school dances. How toys are displayed in stores. Mm-hmm. Someone says everywhere and everything. Video games and movies. Gender reveal parties. Only 2 gender roles are recognized in certain institutions. School registration, he and she pronouns are used.
Yes, those are this is excellent. Very, very good. And the thing is that it varies on where you live. You might, if you go to another country or another part of the country, of this country, there might be different roles. So that's just something that you want to think about. So gender policing, that's where basically you're reinforcing the binary by saying, no, we have constructs in place where, no, this is what it is, this is what it must be. And that's the bottom line. There's nothing you can do about it. So the girl aisle where the dolls and housekeeping type toys is going to be pink all day long, and the boy aisle of toys will be black and blue and dark, period, and violet. There's that. So we can go to the next slide for the sake of time.
I think
so. The other thing, go ahead, Nicole.
I was just going to say, I think some of these and like this self-reflection slide as well can be more for folks to kind of look at and think about within the work that you're doing. Mm-hmm. Super important.
Yeah.
Did you want to do that?
So the thing I'll point out with the cultural institutions, those were already mentioned in terms of schools, work, etc. That's something that you can all keep in mind, just even in your own life, and just things that you might be able to control. The bottom line is that gender is a social construct. It's something that is very, it depends on the time, so it's not something that it doesn't have to be. So we'll move on to, like Nicole said, do the self-reflection as a homework. That's a great point. Let's go to sexual orientation and gender identity expression.
All right, so as you can see with my little person there, a lot of these are going to be very much resource sides for you all. But there are a few on this one that I do want to highlight, the biromantic and panromantic. So biromantic, also if I could go forward, bisexual, biromantic. So a person being attracted to 2 or more genders. Panromantic, a person being attracted to any, every, and all genders. I do get a lot of questions about this, which is why we leave it pretty broad with biromantic and bisexual, 2+ genders. So that can be identified by the person. It doesn't always have to be, I'm attracted to men and women when I say I'm bisexual. So I think that's something really important there. And making sure that we as folks are not policing other people's romantic attractions and sexual orientation.
Right.
So, and not trying to fact check them and, bi,
technically,
that means,
you are.
Yeah, so making sure that we're not doing that. Letting people to just identify however they want, and then really asking them, what does that mean to you? If it's appropriate, of course, but being able to do that. So another one here that I want to talk about, pansexual. I know I kind of just covered it before, but just kind of to point out, this is a trend that I'm seeing in the work that the youth that we're working with. A lot of folks are starting to identify as pan. So that's kind of what that means, being attracted to all genders. Looking at gender and the gender side very quickly, cisgender. So myself and Shireen, we are cisgender. We identify, or we dress according to, so I'm a female and I like to dress feminine, right? So that makes me cisgender. Anything you want to say about that?
Yes, and then also dress, speech, stance. There's a lot that, that defines cisgender. And again, I would recommend you can, look that up. The point of orientation too, orientation is terms of who you are attracted to. And then the terms on the right is your gender identity expression. And that's, again, that's looking at where if you identify on the binary or not on the binary. And the important thing to remember is orientation is not the same thing as identity expression. So you can have someone who identifies as, as female, but their attraction is pansexual. So, yeah.
An example of that I can use myself would be, I would be a cis, white, female who identifies as heterosexual, right? So that's like an example of how that would look like, or how a person can say that.
All right. So again, these are things that you could think about at home. Think about, what do we stereotype? Why does what you have between your legs determine if you should take out the garbage or mow the lawn or cook dinner or take care of the baby? Examine some myths within our cultures, within our home, within our etc. Think about things that are stigmatizing. Cultural competency, they talk about that as a strong awareness of one's own prejudices and stereotypes and a commitment to exploring them. You can't truly be competent. Sometimes I like the terminology like, cultural humility is something that I've heard used more recently. There are other terminologies that's out there. All I'm saying is do your work, which is great. So talk to people. Yes, attend workshops such as this one, dive into the resources that are provided, because we didn't just make all this stuff up. We can't take credit for it. We look into a lot of resources. So I would highly encourage you to do that. Being here is part of it, which is good. So thank you. So how we talk about, we say, oh, we want to have a safe space or inclusive space. And sometimes we don't know what that means. There we go. So safe is that allowing people to be and to show up as their authentic self. And that is their speech, their language, their dress, their culture, whatever it is. That's what it means to have a safe space. Like they can move and navigate within that space and not worry about what people are going to say or do to them. You can't control what people think. But at least you can, have policies in place. You can update your, I guess it's called policy. You can update your policies to reflect that this will be a safe space. And we'll talk a minute about brave space and what that means as well. And then also, what does it mean to be inclusive? And that's when you have practices that enables participation and contribution into society that supports the mission of the organization, eliminating implicit and explicit barriers. Sometimes people, we might say, well, people say that they're trying or whatever. But again, I love someone through this whole Black Lives Matter, they said, show me the receipts. Where are we putting our dollars? Where are we putting our efforts? Where are we putting our capacity building toward being safe and inclusive? What are we valuing? And not just dollars, but our time. Like the fact that you all are here and you're spending your time on this afternoon or this morning being a part of this is a good example of you all practicing, putting forward, being better at providing safe and inclusive practices. And then the other way you can demonstrate safe and inclusive is take a look at if you are in a situation where you have, you ask questions, like typically if your form just says, what is your gender? Give an opportunity to just say where they can check off male, female, and if you put other, allow them to fill in what that other is. If you just say other and it's just a box to check, That's what we call othering. So then they feel like, well, wait, I didn't get to tell you what that was. And again, eliminate saying choose not to disclose. It's better to just leave it as an option on an electronic form where they can fill it out. Rather than choose not to disclose, it sort of makes the person feel like there's some shame or something wrong with when you ask the question about, do you consider yourself to be transgender? Yes, no, or you don't want to. It's almost, there's a shaming in it. So just leave it blank. You can follow up with us on if you have additional questions because we're almost out of time. Yes. So again, this is a Brave Space visual. We just want to show you our rainbow room, which probably can only house 4 people now in the era of COVID, but our LGBTQ center is 8,900 square feet. So we do have space for more people once all of the COVID stuff is over with.
What I want to highlight here too is really having those visuals in schools and classrooms when talking to youth notice. But I think really one criticism I hear from the youth is that making sure that a teacher doesn't just slap up a rainbow sticker and call it a day and then never ask pronouns, or one youth had said that one of their teachers had a rainbow sticker up, but yet that teacher never used their correct name. So making sure that like when we're putting these visuals up, one, they're very, very important and people appreciate them. But 2, making sure that, like Shireen was saying too, that we're still doing our work to be inclusive and safe.
So we have a North Suburban Community Network, which is individuals in the northwest suburbs. Our next meeting is August 18th. We'll talk about that in the closing plenary. But you can follow up with us. There's the 101 video that we have before you fly the rainbow flag. You can just email us at the or contact us through the LGBTQ Center website, and we can provide additional information on flags. What the flags mean, the terminology. We are here to support you in our community. So GLSEN is another great resource, the Trevor Project, etc. So I'll stop talking so that we can take some questions.
One question that came in talking about pronouns and gender was, how do you change Mr., Mrs., and Ms.?
Good question.
Yeah. Do you mean, okay, so like, like in addressing the person?
That's what I would assume.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Yes was the answer.
Interesting.
A very good question.
It's really, any suggestions out there? I have heard ZIR being used. It looks like there might be a suggestion.
It is a link to the LGBTQ plus 101 video.
Okay. I do wonder if it's, I love looking into the history of things, like how did we get to this point? So I do wonder, like, what is the purpose of Mr. and Mrs.? And I know how, in Miss and Ms, part of it is, because if you think about it, Mr., it's Mr. no matter what, whether you're single, whether you're married. But the MRS, MISS, and then in the late 60s, early 70s, when they introduced MS through the feminist movement, that's so that women basically were saying, look, it's none of your business if I'm married or not. It's a way to label women to indicate to the rest of the world their marital status, and it's not right. It's not fair. It shows women as property and belonging to someone, whereas the Mr. part, it's just Mr. So I personally have not been a fan of the Mr. Mrs. part. That's just me personally, and that's why. So if we look into the history of why words are used the way that the way that they're used and in the context, you might find, maybe we shouldn't be using that in the first place.
And the same person who asked the question also points out that MR, Mr., what we read as Mr. now, actually used to be master, which makes it even more suspect.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Wow. Yes, because during that horrible time in our country when they enslaved people, they had the people who were enslaved had to refer to the young children, like the young white male of the house, as Master so-and-so. So you wouldn't call him Mr., you'd say Master John, even though he was 5 years old or whatever.
Someone else points out that you can use MX in print, but don't know how you would say that or pronounce that. And I also right now want to mention that it is 10:20, so we just have 5 minutes left.
Okay, any additional questions?
So there was one that came in. You mentioned conducting our own research on our prejudices and becoming aware of them. Could you go into more in depth into that? Sorry.
Yes, so Georgetown University, sorry, I will add this to the resource, so Nicole's writing it down. Georgetown University, they have a bias training that you can take. It's like a self-guided, free, implicit bias. That's a great place to start. And then there are other resources that we can point out for you. A lot of great online resources. And if you're a teacher, there's teachingtolerance.org. I believe they have a lot of great videos, a lot of great resources on working with LGBTQ youth in schools. And then on the resource page, there's a lot of great resources. And the thing that I love to do is when I find a great resource, I go to their resource page and then I just go into that hole. But I just geek out on things like that. So some people may not, but that's a tip that I highly recommend. If you find a great resource, go to their resource page, and then you'll just keep finding great stuff.
I think another important one too is making sure that we're having these conversations with our colleagues, with our families, and really being able to assess, what are your implicit biases, and then again having those conversations with folks is really important. I do want to say thank you everybody for being here today, asking really great questions. Mm-hmm. This has been a good conversation, almost kind of going back and forth too, so thank you everybody for the questions, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, and then when you have an opportunity to give feedback, please let us know how you would like to continue the conversation. You know, if there's something that you thought, well, we didn't go enough into that. I mean, I know it was a short webinar, but if there's a follow-up you would like, again, we, in this era, we're learning that this is the reality of how we present information. And we would like to, if it's smaller, then we would give people an opportunity to unmute folks and let them share as well. But thank you so much for being here. Again, we appreciate your time, and
we will. I do notice on the PowerPoint we did not include our email contact information, so I will add that both to the PowerPoint when we upload it on the website. So if anybody is interested again in continuing this conversation, Shereen and I are super passionate about the work that we do, so we are very much open to continuing conversations. Please send us an email. We would love to connect.